hello, hello. I'm really looking forward to tonight where I can dream about something that is not this. For the last week or so, I've really been taking the time to really enjoy the next 20 minutes. And what we're going to be taking a look at is transforming the Canadian energy industry through Indigenous partnership and cross-industry learning. What I think is one of the biggest things that we need to take a look at is how we've isolated ourselves as the energy industry and created this problem of ourselves where we refuse to take a look at the solutions that lie around us in different industries. First of all, I do want to introduce myself, just to prove that that I am an Albertan. I was born in Lethbridge, I grew up in Strathmore, and I kept coming down the highway, and now I'm in Calgary. I have a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Calgary, and I'm a current MBA candidate at the Haskayne School of Business. And I really think that the next 20 minutes here is going to take a look at some tough conversations that we need to have. I think one of the things that we also need to take a look at is it needs to get messy before we find a solution. So over the next 20 minutes, we'll take a look at our energy insanity, the history the last 30 years, energy societal debt, the issues as I see them, and the proposed solution, whose answers lie all around us. So I know a lot of us have seen this before, where insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Now, the cyclical nature of energy has taught us that all we had to do was wait for it to get better. Supply and demand and market forces would take control of the recovery, and we would be fine. Well, this time it's a little bit different. I think what we've ignored is that the societal pressures now outweigh the economic forces and the market forces in generating a recovery. So the energy industry is looking to the wrong societal players to help it. So right now, I think we do a good job at pointing fingers at government or regulators, but they're not the ones that are here to help us. They've actually created policy and regulation to protect society and environment from disasters such as these three right here. Now, I apologize to all my Haskayne profs. This is the worst slide in history. But what it does is it takes a look at three major events that have happened 10 years between each other, being the Exxon Valdez, the Enron scandal, and Deepwater Horizon. And what this takes a look at is the effects of these events and impact to society and environment, whether it be the amount of coastline that was impacted, the amount of animals that died. But then on the last column, the reparations and consequences to the corporation. I'd like to highlight a few things, especially on the Enron scandal, that the top 200 employees made $1.4 billion in the year 2000. The fines that were levied against some of the leaders there were incredibly disproportionate to the impacts to environment and society. Over $60 billion was wiped from society through its bankruptcy, and only one person was fined. Somebody died before he was convicted, and all charges pending were declared null and void. The Deepwater Horizon, and Tony Hayward was BP's CEO and president, famously said, "There's nobody that wants this over more than me. I want my life back." He then went in front of Congress and said, "As the leader of BP, I will not stop until the well is stopped." The next day, he was removed from daily operations. 1 month later, he was granted an $18 million US severance package. Now, I do this for one reason, to show that regulation and specific regulation to these disasters has procured the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, the offshore drilling moratorium, and other regulatory restrictions on the energy industry. Now, I'm sure, when you look at the title of my presentation and say, but Greg, you're talking about the Canadian oil industry, but these are US, examples. Canadian energy has not done a good job at differentiating itself from the US because to society. Society has paid a high cost to energy development, while benefactors, the cost has outweighed the perceived and actual benefits. If we take that as true, which I think we're in a bit of a different phase of listening now, that gives us an opportunity. We need to differentiate ourselves and give society, government, regulators a reason to trust and believe us, so that we can work with government and regulators to augment the frameworks under which energy in Canada is governed and regulated. This is how I see us doing this. If we take a look at the top row, these are the major issues that I see in Canadian energy. Industry owes a debt to society. Energy industry has an identity dilemma. Who are we? What is our role in society, other than to make energy and get it to market? There's distrust between all parties, whether it be stakeholder groups, Indigenous groups, government, regulators, even within industry, company to company, company to subcontractors. And one of the major things is Indigenous consultation exhaustion. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I think we need to take a look at these major issues as some things that we can transform and change through the second line: restorative justice, social enterprise, blockchain, agile development, and full Indigenous partnership. So I'm going to go through the bottom row a little more detail, and this is where I make the intersection around cross-industry learning. All of these principles are in place already, and all we have to do is augment the energy context to include some of these principles. You'll see in restorative justice, and this was pulled from the Center for Justice and Reconciliation out of the United States, where perpetrators on society, in crime, major crime, murders, take a look at these principles of restorative justice in repaying the debt to society that has been that has occurred. The number one foundation is a peaceful social life where humans can interact with humans. Respect. And I love the definition of respect in terms of restorative justice, and it's we owe each other respect simply on the basis that I'm human and you're human. That's it. Solidarity, we are working towards the same goal, and active responsibility means this does not end. This is a continuous process that we need to make sure permeates the fabric of society. If we take a look at the operational values, I think there's some similarities when we take a look at what corporate values have and the shape of corporations have taken when talking about their own operational values. Inclusion, collaboration, protection of the environment, education. I think the one operational value that we can learn from is making amends. When I talk about a Canadian solution to some of these issues, I think it's a very Canadian thing to say, I'm sorry. And that's where I think we need to start. The next element is social enterprise. And I've taken this framework from the Institute for Social Enterprise in the United States once again. But when we as industry go to society and say, poor us, look at us, we're really suffering. Last year, these 8 companies made $14.1 billion. To most, that's not a relatable problem. Because when I take a look at, that's $1.6 million a day. That's $26,300 a minute. That's $450 a second for an entire year. And all of a sudden, what we're looking for is society to take a look at our problem as one that's relatable to all Canadians. To me, I think there's a challenge there. There's a lot of frustration for the people who are still out of work. Lower revenue and tax generation have challenged our quality of life as Albertans and Canadians, which is a very significant issue. Energy is unsure on how to operate in Canada, as we certainly all know. Cancelled projects have made Indigenous communities question whether working with industry is worth it due to the rigor of consultation. Because when there's these negotiations that go on for impact benefit agreements, and then a project is canceled, all of that effort and time in negotiating that is wasted. Those sunk costs are incredibly impactful to Indigenous communities whose capacities and capabilities are obviously are not significant enough to ever make up for that investment. And largely these profits have not benefited society other than shareholders and C-suite people. Social enterprise is a pretty simple framework where social enterprise is enshrined in governance, where the purpose of the corporation is foundational to the documents that are foundational to the company. Right now, what we've done is we've put corporate social responsibility as our social direction. And even now we are seeing diminishing returns on that investment into society as not enough. So instead of making it almost a sticker fix to some of the societal demands, we enshrine it in governance. Business operations is key to social enterprise. You need to earn money in order to share it with society. And, with energy, we got that one in the bag. Benefit to society is reinvest the majority of profits into achieving public and community mission, so that there is this feedback between, hey, we are good at producing energy, getting it to market and responsibly. As a part of our governance structure, we know where, whether it be education, whether it be healthcare, we know where, and I know this says majority, but it needs to be more than what we're doing right now in order to show through our actions that we are worthy of trust. The next element, and I do some work with a company called Guild One and Blockchain for Indigenous Rights International, which is a not-for-profit that takes a look at implementing blockchain as a trust mechanism between Indigenous communities, oil and gas, pipeline companies. And where blockchain can be used is certainly in smart contracts. So impact benefit agreements, environmental regulation enforcement, land and treaty rights, payments and disbursements, Indigenous and local contracting agreements. Now, the benefit of blockchain is that we agreed to the principles behind our relationship before we get to a conflict. And unfortunately, what has happened with our industry is that we have planned for conflict as soon as we begin a relationship. And I think blockchain kind of reverses that thinking to avoid it from the get-go. Now, this was a kind of, I have a tech company called Unimaze Technologies Incorporated that obviously tries to build our product on an agile platform. So I did see some commonalities between agile principles and how we build our own relationships in industry. The regulator has created a waterfall project or a development model for relationship building, which obviously has not really served our relationships well. So in taking a look at the guiding principles of Agile development, this comes directly from the Agile Manifesto, working relationships over comprehensive documentation. Documentation of stakeholder engagement is absolutely ridiculous for any practitioner. How many phone calls have you made? How many emails have you sent? Did you receive an email back? This comprehensive documentation obviously doesn't prove whether or not we have a good relationship with a stakeholder or an Indigenous community. But that's what the regulator assesses as the duty to consult. How many emails did you send? But instead of taking a look at the documentation, we ask ourselves, does the relationship work? Does it work towards the common goal of finding a way to take a project from development into construction and put it into operation? Individuals and interactions are more important than processes and tools. Responding to change over following a plan, and collaboration over contract negotiations. I think if we took that and found a way to put that into the regulatory requirements for consultation with all stakeholders and be a little more flexible around what it means to deliver information, gain consent over projects, I think we'd be in a better space. Now, the last point is the duty to consult. And this is a very, very complex issue because the consultation is the bad C word in industry. But it's funny enough that proponents are not legally required to do consultation. It is the Crown's duty to undertake consultation to ensure the government's relationship with Indigenous communities is upheld given the Indian Act. It is in the best interest, let me tell you, for organizations and corporations to undertake this process. But not only do communities have to take consultation from the proponent side, but they also have to do it through government. These are 4 landmark cases where the reason for the duty to consult is the government has a responsibility to Section 35 of our 1982 Constitution, where an action may have adverse consequences on treaty and land rights. That's a pretty broad definition. Consultation is the federal government's responsibility and duty with Indigenous communities and people. The effects of consultation on Indigenous communities has been consultation exhaustion, but it also fortifies a power differential between government and Indigenous people where I have to consult with you and ask you what matters to you so I can make a decision as government on behalf of Indigenous people. It's such a heavy, resource-heavy process that economic development is slowed by this process on Indigenous communities. And it's also exacerbated conflict and overloaded the courts with challenges and appeals. Equality through partnership instead of consultation is kind of a unique approach where through partnership, we are able as industry to partner with Indigenous communities like we would in any other business-to-business relationship. And I know that sounds very simple in terms of, well, why wouldn't we? Because of this power differential. Through partnership, Indigenous communities and the likes of pipeline companies or oil and gas or downstream agree through a partnership agreement, the reason for business and the relationship, where both people have equality of voice and access to information. We share the liabilities and profits. We have an internal governance mechanism that addresses conflict and resolution. And this is probably the most relieving element to the duty to consult is future issues and mutual solutions are addressed and created as they arise. Instead of in the regulatory process where we have to come up with all the potential impacts that could happen over the operation of an asset. So in conclusion, I think we have a new Canadian story where we can say, I'm sorry. And through a restorative justice process, which leads to healing and amends, we take principles of social enterprise to create a new energy identity and purpose. We use blockchain to create trust and infuse trust where maybe there's never been trust. We take a look at agile engagement to build real relationships. And we take Indigenous partnership to show our commitment to Call to Action 92 on behalf of corporations as our commitment to reconciliation, but also enshrine Indigenous right to self-determination, where it's okay to say no, and that they don't feel strong-armed by the regulatory process. Now, in June, I had the opportunity to sit across from Sephora Berman in Toronto at Globe 175 to discuss the future of hydrocarbons in 50 years. And it was very interesting to see how we've weaponized facts. And it was my point that, we have to take a look at addressing feelings of society with empathy rather than facts. We are a logical industry, but that doesn't help address the fear of development. And yesterday's session around nuclear development takes a look at the same kind of concept. I think we need to make a commitment today that what has happened over the last 4 or 5 years is not sustainable, and it's not going to get better unless we take a look at transforming our entire industry. And I certainly take this very seriously, where I do love Canadian oil and gas. I do love Canadian pipelines, and I love it enough to change it. And I hope that everyone in this room who has a vested interest in energy, which is all of us, love it enough to change it too. Thank you.